All right, really excited to kickstart our guest speaker series for the month of June. So it's pretty exciting that we're able to put this together. One of the things that, thinking about all the COVID stuff, it's just, it's a tough time right now, and we're unable to facilitate and have teacher externships and student internships, and some of those opportunities have just changed. So we had to kind of rethink the way we do things. And one of the ways that we can potentially do that is through a guest speaker series, so that you can hear from healthcare professionals in what they're doing in their field as they are either learning or if they are currently in the field and have quite a bit of experience. My name is Josh Mitchell, and I'm an instructor with Education Service Center Region 13. And our first guest speaker for today is going to be my sister, Caitlin Margargee. And our teacher moderator is going to be Amanda Cortez from Valle ISD. And we'll have an opportunity to do a question and answer session with Caitlin, so she can tell you a little bit about her medical school experience. So as I mentioned, my name is Josh Mitchell. I am providing the technical assistance today for this webinar. I've been a health science teacher for about 10 years, and I work for Education Service Center Region 13. And one of the reasons I got into health science teaching was my sister, Caitlin. So Caitlin introduced this to me. I started off my career as a certified athletic trainer. She is a product of health science programs just north of San Antonio at Steele High School. She went through all 4 years of the health science program there, and she pursued her bachelor's degree at Shiner University, in which she got a bachelor's in public health and chemistry. And in addition to that, she pursued her master's degree, and then she finally decided to take the next step and go into medical school, at which point she is working on her Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine. So she will be a full-fledged doctor very soon, but right now she is in her 3rd year and eager to tell you about her opportunities during her 3rd year. And today, moderating the conversation is going to be Amanda Cortez, and Amanda is coming to us from Valle ISD, where she is a health science teacher there. So I'm going to ask that Caitlin and Amanda go ahead and unmute yourself, and we can, Amanda, if you want to take the questions from there, I'll have them popped up on the screen so everybody can see them, and look forward to all your insights, Katie. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Well, let's go ahead and start with the first question. And Caitlin, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
So like my brother said, I went to high school at Steele, took the health science courses. We didn't have any certifications at that time, so I didn't walk away with like any certifications. And then I went to undergrad at Schreiner, which is a small private liberal arts university, like 2,000 students at the max. And like he said, I majored in public health, and I'll talk to that for a second. So basically I chose public health, one, because it was more interesting to me than a hard science. And number 2 is I felt like I could actually get better grades doing that than like majoring in something than biochemistry. And then while I was there, I did a study abroad to Nepal, graduated, did some volunteering with the refugee clinic in San Antonio, which I feel like helped my application, did a master's, and I chose to do that because I hadn't taken my MCAT yet, which I'll talk about that a little bit later too, the MCAT, and my GPA was meh. So yeah, I chose the master's to kind of make my application a little bit more competitive, and then I ended up being accepted to that DO school, which is University of the Incarnate Word in San Antonio. And just telling you a little bit about osteopathic physicians. So they're basically the same as MDs, which is what most people are familiar with. We just get a little bit extra training in osteopathic manipulative treatments, which in layman's terms is kind of like a mix of chiropractics and physical therapy. So that's really the only difference. Our boards are slightly different too, to include the OMT, but we practice the same medicine basically.
Wow, awesome, thank you. The second question is, why do you want to become a doctor, or what inspired you to go into medicine?
So I think I'm just like kind of one of those lucky people where I always knew, even from a young age, like I was really young and had a little doctor's kit, and I would like work on my baby dolls. So lucky that I always knew that, but I also had doubts along the way. So while I was getting my master's, you know, I wasn't sure if I was cut out for being a doctor, or if I wanted to make the sacrifices, which there are many. So I actually like did a little bit of counseling on that, and I, you know, ultimately decided that I wanted to be at the top of the education. I wanted to be the person making the final decisions. And so that's why I decided to pursue that instead of PA or NP. But ultimately the passion just stems for like wanting to help people.
Good, thank you. Can you describe for the students what a week or a day, whichever you think would be a better reflection at a glance of a third-year medical student?
So third year is when things definitely get more fun. So the first and second year, you're just in the classroom and you're studying all the time, which get me wrong, I'm still studying all the time, but so I'll break it down to what a third year schedule looks like when you're on a hospital rotation, and then what a third year schedule looks like when you're outpatient, so like in a family medicine clinic. So I'll start with family medicine clinic because that's currently the rotation I'm on right now, actually. So it's pretty nice. Clinic doesn't open till 8:30, so I actually get to sleep in, if you consider it that. So I show up, I meet with the residents because I'm at an academic center, so I work with them primarily instead of, I guess, like full-fledged board-certified doctors. So we kind of go over the patient list for the day, split up the patients because it is a team, so they'll tell me who to go see. And so I'll interview those patients, I'll do physical exams on them, I'll come up with a plan, like what labs I want to order, what I think the diagnosis is. And then I will present that to those residents. And then it kind of works up the chain of command. Then those residents will go in the room, ask any questions I didn't ask, repeat the physical exam, come up with their own assessment and plan, and we kind of come up with a consensus. And then we check out a patient, which is presenting it to an attending, which is nerve-wracking. And then if the attending thinks it's a complicated patient, maybe they'll go see them. So like a patient could ultimately end up seeing 3 different providers in a given visit. And then because I'm at an academic center, I don't get a lunch break. We go to lecture. And then we do that all week, and then except for Thursdays, which half the day is just lecture. So you continue learning when you're in clinicals. And so then I get to go home around 5:30 or 6, depending who I was with. If I was with a first-year resident, they're a little bit slower. I go home later. And then I continue studying. It's just part of the game. And then I also work out. Really important for your mental health when you're in such a stressful field. And then I prep for the next day and just relax the rest of the night. When you're on inpatient in the hospital, it's a lot different. You usually have to be at the hospital about like 6:30 in the morning, because basically the overnight team is going to check out their patients to you and tell you what's going on with them. So they'll check them out to you. It takes about an hour. So around 7:30, I'll go see the patients by myself that I've been assigned. I'll examine them, ask them how they were doing overnight. And this is called pre-rounding. And that usually takes about an hour and a half. And then once everyone on the team has finished pre-rounding, we'll all meet and then we'll round together. So like, 6 or 10 of us will be going to a patient's room, and that takes a really long time. That can take about 3 hours. And then, usually it's like lunch, which again, there's lectures if you're at an academic place. And then after lunch, you kind of come up with the assessment and plan for everyone. You start to get them tucked in for the overnight team. And then checkout is around 6:37. And then you go home. And since you've been there since 6:30 in the morning, you're too tired to study. So you put that off. And you're probably too tired to work out, so you don't do that either. And then you repeat. And then like another differentiating thing is when you're in the hospital, you probably are going to work weekends and there could be call. So hospitals are definitely a lot more work than clinic.
Wow. So are there 12-hour sequential shifts when you're doing your clinicals, or do you have some breaks, or how often are you doing those 12-hour rounds?
So I did 6/12s was the
Wow.
usual for me. There's technically a law that you're only supposed to work 90 hours, but not always followed.
Wow. Okay, so as a high school student aspiring to go into the healthcare professions, what academic advice do you have?
So you guys are doing the right things. You're taking health science courses. So the number one thing you need to do is make sure this is what you actually want to do. Because like I said, it's a huge sacrifice. If there's even an inkling of doubt, you want to investigate that and make sure this is the right field for you, and kind of determining, like, do I want to be a nurse? Do I want to be a PA? Or do I want to be a doctor? And the best way to do that is to get clinical experience, start shadowing, start working in the clinical environment, find mentors. Mentorship is extremely important in the medical field. Our application process, our schooling is so different than any other field. It's really important to find a mentor. And then that clinical experience too is going to help your application. So a lot of my fellow students were scribes or pharmacy techs or EMTs even. They worked in the medical field, and schools like that because it shows commitment. Obviously, getting good grades is important. So there's a couple programs they have now called direct admits. So I would look those up. There's undergrads where when you enter undergrad, you can like sign into a contract saying they'll automatically accept you into their medical school if you maintain a certain GPA. And some of them even don't require you to take the MCAT, which is really nice. Saves you some money, saves you some stress. So I recommend that. Undergrad, honestly, I don't really think it matters where you go. I think it's just finding the right fit in places that will have the right opportunities for you. So I chose Schreiner because it was small. So I knew it wasn't going to be competitive to find research. I knew it wasn't going to be competitive to find volunteer experiences. And I knew that it was a requirement for me to graduate to study abroad, which was really important to me. So you want to pick somewhere that fits with you and where you know you're going to be happy, because, all this sacrifice at the end of the day is not worth it if you're not happy. So recommendations when you're in undergrad is, maintain a good GPA. It's really hard your first semester to figure out how to study in undergrad because it's so different than high school, but there's so many resources at college. There's the tutoring center, your professors, they want you to come and find them and reach out for help. So I highly recommend that. And it's not the end of the world if you don't do well in a class. I repeated OChem and physics, and I still got into med school. So you don't have to, obviously high grades, but it's not the end of the world. And then whenever it comes time to think about the MCAT, which usually people take it their junior year or third year of college, there's prep courses, and sometimes your college will offer those for free, so look into that. Do research if it interests you. Volunteer a lot, but I would say pick one or two places to volunteer and show a long-term commitment there instead of a bunch of random projects. I feel like that's what stood out the most on my application was volunteering at a refugee center in San Antonio, because no one else at my med school had that experience, and I devoted over 200 hours to it. And it's something I talked about in my interview a lot. So yeah, those are just some tips that I have.
Well, thank you for your honesty thus far, because it really gives them a good perspective of what they can expect. I know you've said several times that it's hard or it was difficult. I guess for the next question, what were the top, like the things that were the most difficult, and how were you able to manage that? How did you get through those difficult things that you've encountered in medical school?
So by far and large, the most difficult part of medical school is your board exams, which are standardized tests. You pay a lot of money for them, and you spend all day in a testing center taking them. and you really only get one shot. So there's a lot of pressure, and depending on how well you do on them kind of determines like what specialties will be open to you. So like for competitive specialties like dermatology or ophthalmology, high board scores are what open doors is the saying. And then being a DO, it's recommended that I take our DO boards, but then also the MD board. So just like kind of double that stress is what I went through. But yeah, they're really high stakes. They're so high stakes that your school gives you a dedicated time, which is like 6 to 8 weeks of just studying all day, 12 hours a day. And you get like this imposter syndrome where you think you're not worthy and you're gonna fail the exam. So it's really hard on your mental health. But you know, I think just being cognizant. So I knew like I'm a very social person, and so I knew it wouldn't be good for me to just study for 12 hours and not interact with anyone. So I actually lived at home with my parents, which was so helpful. So they could start to notice like when I was getting too stressed and be like, hey, I think you need to like take a break for a little bit. Also exercising. Because you're doing dedicated at home, like you can work into your schedule workouts easier than like when you're in the hospital. And I highly recommend that because not only does it help with stress levels, it helps with retaining knowledge. Same as like good sleep patterns, good stress habits. So I saw a counselor a couple times just to, you know, coping mechanisms. And then just realizing you're not alone. You know, the hard thing about the board exams is that you're never done taking them. So I'll take 3 exams in med school, and then I'll take 2 more after that, and then have to recertify every 10 years. So you have to start good habits early. And then the other stressful thing is like with COVID, all the testing centers got shut down. So it's just very up in the air, like when I will take my next boards.
Thank you. What, you're either finished or close to finishing your 3rd year. And so what does the rest of your medical school education look like?
So I'll speak to when there isn't COVID because that's the usual. So usually your 4th year, you do things called elective rotations and audition rotations. So basically, you apply for rotations outside of your school. So I applied all over the country into specialties or a specialty that interests me. So I want to do emergency medicine. So I applied to about 40 of those and plan to do 3 months worth of emergency medicine at different places. And basically they're month-long interviews. So that's really stressful because every time you're on shift, you are interviewing. So like you can never be off your game. And then basically they write you a letter of recommendation that every residency will see once you graduate and apply for residency. So you do that. You also take 2 boards during your 4th year. You take a physical exam board where you have to travel to, I was gonna have to travel to Chicago, and you have patient actors, and there's like a video camera and it records you and then they grade you on that. And then I was going to have to take our level 2 board, which is just multiple choice, like clinical scenarios. And then let me see what else. And then just continue to do 4-week rotations. So I was going to do 4 EM, and then, you know, your school has requirements, like you have to do another surgery. You have to do 2 more inpatient. And then around September, you start applying for residencies. And you enter the match, which if you're not familiar with the match, basically after you interview all these places, you rank where you want to go, like 1 to 20. And then those programs rank the residents they want, you know, on a scale of like 1 to 500. And then an algorithm kind of cross matches you so that you only get 1 offer. So on the same day, everyone in the country receives their offer to where they're going to be going to residency. It is a somewhat stressful process because there's not a lot of say in it, and there's not really any negotiation in the contract. So I'd say if you do want to go to med school, you have to be flexible about where you'll end up location-wise. Like there's a good chance I may not, you know, stay in the state of Texas. It's kind of out of my control. So yeah, that is kind of in summation the rest of fourth year. And then depending on the specialty you pick, you're going to complete a residency. So for like EM, it's 3 years. For general surgery, I think it's 5. So they're all different. You can just research that. And basically, you work 90 hours a week for however long that residency is. So it's long and arduous, and you're not paid very well. Like if you divide it out by the amount of hours you work, you're paid less than minimum wage. So it's definitely a challenging time when you're a doctor, but the payoff, is at the end.
Yes. So you did mention that things are going to be a little bit different now because of COVID. So how has COVID impacted your medical training?
So number one, so I was on my OB-GYN rotation, I think it was February, and I received an email at like 3 o'clock that night saying, you can't go to your rotation anymore. You guys are all being pulled out. So we were pulled out because I think as everyone's seen on the news, there wasn't enough PPE, and medical students, like, were not essential to the team. Like I said, like 2 other people still see the patient after us. So they didn't want to waste PPE on us, which is understandable. So they pulled us out. We kind of switched to an online version of rotations, and then we did a telemedicine elective, which is good because telemedicine really is going to become incorporated into medicine, for the rest of our lives. So we did that. And then finally, I was allowed to go back to rotations 2 weeks ago when my school was able to secure PPE for us. So like every couple weeks, I have to drive to my school, and they give us like the masks and gowns that were allotted for 2 more weeks. All of our lectures are no longer in person; they're via Zoom. The other thing that's different is a lot of away rotations, like I was talking about earlier, were canceled. So depending on your specialty is whether or not you're even allowed to go on them anymore. So for EM, we're allowed to go on 1 away rotation still. And I think that's the highest number I've seen. So only 1 away rotation. And then the rest of your electives will either be online or you'll have to have your school help you set those up like in the area that you're at. The other big thing is that all residency interviews have switched to an online format. So I would get really comfortable with this because I think after this year, it'll be hard to go back to in-person interviews. So in-person interviews, like I said, you're applying all over the country. I think like the average cost is like $7,000 a student. And it's really expensive for the residencies too. And it's not an equitable system. Like if you come from an underserved population, like you can't afford to go all those places. And like residencies recognize that. So I kind of foresee the online interviews staying after this, actually.
Wow. What personal characteristics do you think are necessary for medical school success?
Well, number one, I'll give you guys this example. So ethics, you have to be an ethical person. And in every step of your education, you're going to be met with challenges that will question your ethics. People are going to be cheating, and you just have to have the morals to say no. A really relevant example is a second year from my med school actually was like trending on Twitter 3 days ago for racist tweets. And basically he went viral, and like he's never going to match into a residency now. So like he wasted $200,000 in like, how many years of his education, and he's never going to match now. So being an ethical person, watching what you post on the internet, not breaking any laws, because if you break laws, you're not going to get a license. So that's part of it. And then the other part I would say is resilience. So medical school is a marathon and not a sprint. You will burn out really quick if you just go, guns a-blazing the entire time. So learning good coping strategies now is really important because it only gets harder. And even though it only gets harder, it doesn't seem that way because you're learning coping strategies along the whole time. So just remembering that, and, anytime you face a setback, which you will, just learning to overcome that.
Awesome. I know you've mentioned community service quite a few times. how big of an important part is that in medical school or applying to medical school?
So community service, probably about 10, 15 years ago was just like a box you checked off on your application, but now it's becoming more and more important every year. I think everyone's heard stories of like old doctors who are just like really mean to their patients and don't care about the community. And the way medical schools responded to that is by putting a bigger emphasis on the humanities and looking at an applicant more holistically. So I think community service is like that was the reason why I got into my medical school. It's important because it shows a devotion to the community. It shows you have ethics. It shows you have morals. It shows you have compassion. And like I said earlier, it's better to choose one or two projects you're extremely passionate about and devote all your time to that instead of picking 20 to only spend a couple hours at. And make sure you're having fun. It's not worth it to spend like 200 hours serving somewhere that you don't enjoy. So find something you really like, something you're passionate about, because it will for sure come up in your interview, and it'll be easy to tell whether or not, that was a genuine experience for you.
And how soon do you think that high school students should be starting to collect those and find places to do community service, shadowing, mentorships?
Start now. And I'll leave my email in the chat after this. I'm more than happy to mentor anyone because I know it can be hard. And I know it's hard to find shadowing too outside of your schools. I mean, I remember cold calling like 50 physicians and no one wants to take you because it's a liability. So I think it's awesome that you guys have this curriculum that allows it. But, I think it's a habit and it's a way of life, and it just becomes ingrained into you that, part of my purpose in life is to do community service. And that's what med schools are looking for. And then the shadowing, like I kind of mentioned earlier, I think it's really important just to make sure it's the right fit for you. I guess I didn't really understand what medicine was like until I started shadowing in college because I finally had more time to devote to it. I would try and shadow in different specialties and in different settings because clinic is so different from ER, which is so different than hospital, and just finding what fits with you, but never too early.
Awesome. What final advice do you have for high school students that are aspiring to go to medical school?
So I have, focus on your happiness. That's something that I've always focused on that I've noticed not all my peers have. Like, they did research just because they had to check that box off. And like, I just wasn't willing to compromise my happiness to just like check off stuff on a resume. And I think that showed in my interviews. And like I said, I'm a happier person. I'm less likely to become victim of burnout because, I'm doing things I enjoy and like finding those hobbies and knowing what like refills your cup because you're going to need it, at some point down the line when the road gets harder. And then the other thing is resilience. So like learning coping strategies now because things are always up in the air and things are going to happen out of your control. And like, maybe you fail a physics exam, but you just have to learn how to cope and know it's not the end of the world. Because at the end of the day, like when you're interviewing for residencies, they don't want to pick someone that when something goes wrong, they panic and freeze. They want to pick someone that's able to remain calm and flexible. So just like working on those characteristics, I think is way harder than like just studying your tail off because you don't have to be the most intelligent person in the world to get into med school. Like the curriculum's not that hard. The hard part is the volume, and I guess kind of the hills you have to overcome. So resilience is what makes medical school hard, not the content.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your honest answers. Thank you. I know that it is very important for them to hear a inside view, so honest, like you said. So now we're going to open it up for questions from the attendees. And so if anybody has a question, I think it's best if you just type them into the chat and I will read them out loud, and you can start doing that now.
And then like while people are talking, I'll just chat a little bit. So like I was talking about, like the board exams never end. So I took a standardized exam to tell my school that I was ready to take another standardized exam today. So it's very interesting. Okay, so what did I like most about public health? So being honest, I don't like the hard sciences, which medicine like kind of has some hard sciences in it, but not really. Like, I never use physics now. And public health, I believe, is like the route to fixing all health problems in our society. So like, sure, as a doctor, I can help like 100 people with hypertension, but I can do way more beneficial things for society if I target like 1,000 people before they ever get hypertension. So like some things that I got to do with public health was work at that refugee clinic. So I did like a vaccine drive, mobile mammograms, and pap smears. So I feel like I ended up saving more lives in the long term than I ever would have had done just being a doctor, because we're working downstream of the problem. Also, the coursework was a little bit easier, which I enjoyed. I got to enjoy my undergrad a little bit more. And then the study abroad piece, so public health, there's a subsection of it that deals with global health, and that's where my passion lies. I would love to do medicine overseas, and overseas the focus is more on public health because people are, still dying of infectious diseases in poorer countries. Was there ever a point where you wanted to give up? Yes. So when I was in my master's program, I just gone through a really bad breakup, and I just felt like a total failure. I didn't think I was cut out for medicine. I didn't think I was going to be happy in medicine. And I saw a psychologist. Like, it is perfectly fine to see a psychologist. So she kind of helped me talk through everything. And through talking through things with her, I realized, like, yes, I do want to be a doctor. And yes, I am willing to make those sacrifices. And then once I realized that, she was able to help me come up with like coping skills and strategies to kind of stay motivated. But, it's going to happen. There's going to be points when you want to give up. Like when I was board studying, I wanted to give up. When my boards got canceled in Chicago, like, I wanted to give up for a little bit. It's a total normal feeling. You just have to work past that hump. And for me right now, that's exercising almost every day. That is talking to my friends in med school, because no one will understand it like the people who are in it with you at that moment. And then staying connected to family. Med school can be really isolating because you're studying so much. That if you let it, you won't see people for weeks. Like I have classmates who haven't seen people for weeks, and that's just not healthy. So just creating a support system now, it's important. Are there different exams for different medical careers? So I can speak to this a little bit. So I lived with nursing majors in undergrad, and yes, so depending on the field you're in, all those exams are different. So for nursing school, they take a standardized test to tell the school that, yes, this person should be in the nursing program. And then kind of across the board, once everyone finishes their medical education, they take a licensure exam. And that's like the big one that says, yes, I can practice. I did well enough in school, basically. What do you recommend we as high school juniors do during the summer with the, okay, so that's really hard with the COVID stuff going on. I saw someone that like got a certification. So I think working on your education, like the EKG tech, people are going to be more willing to let you into the clinical setting if you have like skills to offer, especially right now. Like they're just not going to want to take the liability of having you in clinic during COVID. But like if you're an ER tech or a scribe, then they'll just hire you and you'll get those clinical experiences anyways. So doing that or volunteering. So I think like the food bank, you can still volunteer with during COVID. And then if you're a junior too, like you can just research. So like there's a ton of people now on YouTube who vlog being in med school and like the different health professions. And I think those are actually pretty accurate portrayals from what I've seen. So like that's another way to kind of shadow, but like virtually. Let me think what else. I think that's it for now. Yeah, I would do those things. And, you know, work on your applications. You're a junior, maybe start thinking about your essay for colleges, because you have time now. So, what are the programs you mentioned earlier that you can get into med school? Okay, so UT used to have one. I don't think they have it anymore. It was called the STAR program. The University of Incarnate Word has one that is still, they still use, and I've met some of the college students through it. So basically, if you have like a high enough GPA and you tested well in high school, you can interview to be in a direct admit. So these students interview with the undergrad, University of the Incarnate Word, saying, yes, I want to go to your med school, and I think it's 3 years, it's an accelerated, and they get accepted. And as long as like they maintain like above a 3.5 GPA, you get to go to their med school, you get to go straight in, you don't have to interview. Most places you don't have to take the MCAT, which is really nice. And then some of them even let you shadow. So like Incarnate Word, I've seen some of their students like are at the clinics when I'm there, which is really nice. So there's probably 4 or 5 Texas programs that do that. And then,
could you speak to the, so you talked about the benefits of some of those programs. What would be the downfall of doing like a direct admit program into medical school?
so on average now, in the past few years, the age of people that are in medical school is older than it used to be. It used to be everyone went straight out of undergrad, but that's not the case anymore. I'm actually younger than the majority of my class. I think the average age was 26 when they started medical school, and their life experience and their maturity have made them better students and better doctors. And I've noticed from the people that were direct admits, there's kind of like an immaturity there, which, you know, when I was 21, I was immature too. And I just don't think you're necessarily ready for the intensity and the dedication to the curriculum, unless you're just a very studious person to begin with. The other thing too is like you're just missing out on all these experiences. Like I loved college, and I wouldn't have wanted to given up a year of it just to get into med school earlier. So I would say that's the con. And then also you're kind of committed to that medical school. So you wouldn't be applying anywhere else. Oh, and then speaking of another direct admit program, there's a program called JAMP. So if you're low income, when you go to undergrad, you can apply for the JAMP program, and each Texas undergrad picks one student from their school who will become the JAMP person. And they automatically get an acceptance into a Texas school, and they automatically get interviews at all the Texas schools. And then I think like their MCAT score can be a little bit lower than average in order to keep those interviews. So that's like another way to kind of get in the indirect way. And it's a great program. Everyone I know that went through it, you know, ended up at schools that they loved.
May I ask one more question about the direct admit?
Yeah.
If you, let's say you're going through that direct admit and you decide after 3 years you don't want to go to med school, what do you do with that degree as part of that direct admit program? Is it a good degree to have?
Okay, so that's like the other hard part, and kind of why I chose public health too. So like a bachelor's in science, if I'm being honest, isn't the most lucrative degree to have. It's not the easiest to find jobs in. So yeah, you're kind of stuck at like an entry-level lab assistant if you don't further your education. But like if you know you're passionate about sciences, then you could always just go get your master's and PhD. But like public health kind of gives you a safety net. I feel like their entry-level jobs pay maybe a little bit better, and there's more room to figure out what you want to do and to promote up. But you can always decide no in those direct admits and do something else. There's no like contract obligation. Did you typically have good grades in high school? I'll be honest, I don't even remember what my grades were in high school. I definitely wasn't in the top quartile. Like I didn't get automatic acceptance. And Schreiner isn't a very competitive undergrad. I don't even think I had to write an essay or interview there. And ultimately, like once you're in undergrad, no one cares what your high school grades were, as long as you're passing your classes. So unless you're trying to get to Harvard, it doesn't really matter. And then also, like, once you're in med school, it doesn't really matter what med school you went to. So small or big college. So this is a personal decision. I wanted to be a big fish in a small pond and not a small fish in a large pond. I wanted to stand out and not have to work that hard to do it. So I went to a small school. I just went up to, like, my professors. I'm like, I want to do research, and there was no limitation. So I automatically got the research I wanted. If you didn't show up to class, you got a text from that professor saying, hey, where are you? Also, I feel like my letters of rec were more personalized because, like, my school was so small that, like, we'd go to professors' houses and honestly we're almost like friends. So that's all things that mattered to me. And also, like, I really wanted to be at a liberal arts school, just because I wanted to be a well-rounded student, and, like, the study abroad was important to me. The big colleges, your research projects are going to be more substantial because you have more resources. So, like, we had labs at my school, but they weren't very good ones. And there just wasn't a lot of money to put towards it. So less opportunity for research. And then also, like, I couldn't take cool classes like neurobiology because there just wasn't the faculty to teach it. So it'll greatly impact your electives too, whether or not you go to a small or large school. The other thing too, going to a small school, like, the amount of people that transferred out was pretty high just because the small school just doesn't fit with everybody. Like, not everyone wants to know every student that goes to their school. Like, that was a big complaint. Also, like, most of small schools are in small towns, and yeah, some people just didn't like that. But for me, it fit, and I feel like it helped my application. There's, I think, like 5 people for my undergrad, which doesn't sound like a lot, but given that there's only 2,000 students, like, a good chunk got into my medical school. So I think it just depends on location. So some of the smaller colleges are more expensive, which is kind of a hard part. But interacting, like, Schreiner, I thought was really good. St. Edward's, every time I interacted with them, I thought they were really good. TLU, trying to think what else. You'd have to research it more, because honestly, I only applied to 1 undergrad. I only applied to 1 undergrad, 1 master's, and 1 medical school. I don't recommend that. Do you have enough time to have a job during school? Okay, so in medical school, I got in trouble for having a job, actually. So I sold tickets to the sporting games at, like, our local high school, and I mentioned it to the school once, and I got very upset. So you're not really supposed to have a job in medical school. It's not recommended. There's maybe, like, 3 of us that, like, kept it on the down low that we had jobs. And it was a very small commitment. It was only, like, at the max 10 hours a week. And then once you get to clinicals, like, there's just no way to have a job because honestly, I don't know my schedule until the week before, sometimes the day before. And like I said, working weekends, overnights, and you just never know when you're going to get off. Like, if the team ran behind, then I'm staying behind. And so, like, I've left the hospital as late as 8 o'clock at night. So there's just not predictability. I think some people tutor a little bit because there's some flexibility with that. So you could charge money for that. In undergrad, I worked like a dog. I don't recommend that either. I had 4 jobs and I was working, like, full time, which is probably why my grades weren't that great. But it's what I enjoyed. So that's why I did that. I liked working. Also, thinking really far ahead, when you're applying to residency, if you've had a job before, it makes you more likely to match into a residency. So something to consider.
Are there any other questions?
Also, if you're going to do a job, I would recommend, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Get a clinical job so that you can shadow, get your letter of recs, and get paid.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I didn't do
Any other questions, anybody? All right.
Okay. Let me put my email in case you guys, like, have questions or want mentorship. I know it's really hard to find a mentor.
And I just want to let you all know while she's doing that, just wanted to thank Amanda for being our moderator today. That was awesome. And for everybody who was in the background working on this, myself, Workforce Solutions, Seton, to put all this together. Thank you all so much. And then otherwise, Katie, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. That's amazing to just think through all of the stuff that goes into getting to that point where you're going to be a medical doctor. And I think it's a very eye-opening experience for all of us to hear that. So thank you so much. Appreciate it. And for those of you who are in school, in high school, have a great summer. And hopefully you can join us for some of our other speakers coming up. Our next one's going to be next Friday on the 12th. We're going to be talking to Dr. Avilia Edwards, who is a pediatrician and advocate for Seton Healthcare System here in Austin, Texas. So hopefully you'll be able to join us, and so happy that we were able to share this experience. And once again, Katie, you rock. Thank you so much. And everybody have a great weekend. Take care.
Good luck.